So we get to finally talk about the Nintendo DS and the Sony PlayStation P, the PlayStation Portable, and see how these two consoles hold up in 2025. Now what's very crazy is this is almost like the 20th anniversary of both these consoles actually coming out. The Nintendo DS came out about 2004, the PSP came out in 2005. Now it is pretty crazy to me, in my personal opinion. When I think of the Nintendo DS, I always think about the Nintendo DS Lite. I don't think of the original Nintendo DS, just to be honest, because the DS Lite was a very big upgrade. That's what the DS should have been, to be honest. Now, when we take a look at these two consoles, to rewind back, growing up, I basically had a Nintendo DS. I knew a lot of people that had a PSP, and when I think of that genre of gameplay, it was so interesting to me because both of these consoles were very interesting. I feel like there were people like myself who had a Nintendo DS and were kind of jealous of the people who had a PSP, and there might have been some people who had a PSP that were jealous of the DS as well. But looking back, I kind of do think in some ways these two consoles grew separately, and it's so interesting because they were the biggest competitors at the time. But now I think these two kind of had their own experiences, and it's very, very interesting. Now with the Nintendo DS, this was basically the next iteration for Nintendo. They had all these, Nintendo has so much IP. They had all those Pokemons and Zeldas, Animal Crossing and Mario. So those were just some examples, and because of that, you're not going to be able to play those games on the PSP. Typically the storyline of these Nintendo DS games, or at least Nintendo games in general, are some of my favorite ones. So that's always been a huge stand-up feature for the Nintendo DS. It was a dual screen, device. It was giving you the touchscreen at the bottom, and that touchscreen actually probably held up quite well throughout the last couple of years because everything is like touchscreen nowadays. And I feel like Nintendo was able to kind of have like an edge a little bit just because that particular console was giving you a touchscreen with that stylus. The PSP was giving you one display, which was bigger than the two displays or single displays you were getting on the DS. And the PSP also has a lot of kind of games that are specifically tailored for this type of experience, mostly because that type of console had more power. You were getting better graphics inside of it, and it was just a more powerful console than the DS, to be honest. One of the issues I had with the Nintendo DS was that besides playing games, there wasn't really too much else you could really do. You had like PictoChat and some other things, but there wasn't really that much of an experience with the DS, if I'm just being honest. The PSP, it gave you a huge experience outside of it. You can put your music on the PSP, you could play videos, you could, go into the PlayStation Store at the time and download games straight to your PSP. You had a humongous experience with the PSP, even like an internet browser you had inside of your PSP. The DS was pretty bare bones. The DSi was a good upgrade, but the PSP to the standard DS, the PSP was giving you a little bit more capability and more of an experience than the DS, to be honest. But with that being said, the games on the DS looked beautiful. The graphic style was very, very nice. You had a mix of, good games for the most part that you could play on both, which was actually really, really cool. So I thought that was always something really awesome. And also the DS was just known of getting better battery life inside of that type of console, which was really cool. And I thought that was something, whenever I took my DS anywhere, that was always somewhat of I always knew that console was going to hold up very, very well. Beyond that though, when it kind of comes down to the gaming library between both, again, it's kind of a mixed bag. There were probably more games, actually, I don't know. I would say that both consoles had a good amount of games between both. There were some overlapping games between both as well, but because the PSP was just more powerful, that console was kind of giving you just a better experience. Even the games that were available between both, I think of like GTA Chinatown Wars, I played that game on both these consoles, and the PSP version definitely looked so much better than the DS version at that time. And even then you had like a bunch of other GTAs that came out for the PSP. So that was another really cool thing. These games on the PSP looked amazing. The DS, on the other hand, the games had their own art style. They weren't the graphically most intense games of all time, but they still looked pretty good for the most part. But definitely I would say the PSP console was a really, really good one for the most part, in my personal opinion. Now, the DS right now, how it stands, it is kind of easier to find. It's a little bit cheaper to go and pick up as well, because there were just so many DSs and PSPs that were sold. I think the PSP definitely probably is a little bit more expensive, which could be a good thing if you own a PSP because you can sell it for more. But if you're trying to buy one, the DS is a cheaper one. It's a little bit more affordable for some people out there. But as of today, still in my personal opinion, even though I had a DS growing up and I loved my DS and I always loved it, I think the PSP is the one that still has more of a community now and just is still kind of holding in there because of the amount of, homebrew community behind the PSP. And because it was more than just like a gaming console, it allowed you to kind of tap into this huge network of people playing so many different like homebrew and, emulators and so many things on a PSP. Like, it's actually insane. The DSi is a little bit of a different story, but the DS and DS Lite, they didn't really give you that much more besides the games. So that was always kind of like a bottleneck for the DS. And even now, the PSP, if you get the original one or the last one or whichever one you got, because of the emulation behind it, there's just so much capability behind something like a PSP nowadays, and it is actually pretty insane. So it's a mixture between the emulation, the community behind the PSP that makes it genuinely very, very cool. And I think that is kind of the better one in my personal opinion, how it holds up in 2025. But on the flip side, I still think a Nintendo DS is a very good console. There are a lot of games that came out for the PSP that are cross-platform. There's also a lot of games that came out for the PSP that were only for the PSP. But I think the DS, there were more, first-party titles and games specifically made for the DS than the PSP. I think that was always something that kind of stood out to me in my personal opinion. But I also think with something like a PSP, compared to the DS, it was kind of more of a unique experience. There weren't a lot of games at that time or consoles that were giving you like this dual screen experience. I mean, that was like kind of insane in and of itself. But also when you're looking at these consoles right now, it does seem like even though there's a lot of emulators for both these consoles, I don't know, like I feel like I hear a lot more about Nintendo DS games than PSP games. I hear a lot about these other games that came out since then, but that was kind of the first thing that kind of stood out to me in my personal opinion. I do find myself probably playing more DS games nowadays than PSP games. But even with that being said, just the software experience on the PSP is like unrivaled. It was such a beautiful experience, and I always come back to that because even if the DS had better graphics, let's just say that was the case, the PSP was giving you more of an experience. Right? Nowadays, a gaming console is way more than just playing games. You look at the PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and the Nintendo Switch, you can do a lot more than just playing games, right? Even though those are gaming consoles, you can still do a lot of other things. The DS, was kind of in that situation where it only allowed you to play games. So luckily Nintendo learned from it and the DSi was a massive jump, but the PSP just did such an amazing job, and I really do feel like that console probably did hold up better over time than the Nintendo DS. So take it as you will. I love both these consoles. They're both very different, obviously, and I feel like you can own both. And that's the thing that I've grown, and I've known since I've grown, is that these two consoles, even though they were kind of competitors, they're like living as separate systems now because they both aged so beautifully, and I think they're still completely worth buying. They're still completely worth playing. I just think the PSP might be the better one for some people, and the DS might be better for some other people as well. So that's kind of how I see it. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video.